Why your affirmations aren't working, and how Florence Scovel would fix them. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that the spoken word never returns void, that it goes forth and accomplishes exactly what your consciousness behind it believes. And today, we uncover the quiet reason so many good words, spoken with good intentions, seem to fall to the ground and never rise again. The premise for today comes from the book of James, chapter 1, verses 6 through 8, and it reads like this. But let him ask in faith, nothing wavering, for he that wavereth is like a wave of the sea, driven with the wind and tossed. For let not that man think that he shall receive anything of the Lord. A double-minded man is unstable in all his ways. That is the whole trouble laid bare in a single breath. Not that the word lacked power, but that the one speaking it was standing in two places at once, 1 foot in faith and 1 foot in fear, and a person split like that cannot receive, because there is no single steady soul at home to open the door when supply comes knocking. So before we go further, let us plant our feet in one place only. Say this with me. I am not double-minded. I am not tossed about. My word is my wand. Say it with me. I am not double-minded. I am not tossed about. My word is my wand. Again, I am not double-minded. I am not tossed about. My word is my wand. Now, if you have ever spoken an affirmation and felt it drop like a stone the moment it left your lips, if you have ever declared abundance in the morning and apologized for lack by evening, type the words, "fix it," in the comments right now. Just those two words, fix it. Because what we are about to walk through together will show you exactly where the crack in the vessel has been and exactly how Florence Scovel Shinn would seal it, so nothing you pour in ever leaks back out. The first law is this. A word spoken from a divided house cannot stand. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that the subconscious mind is a faithful servant. It takes the words you give it, quite literally, and if in the morning you say, "I am prosperous," and by afternoon you whisper to a friend, "Business is slow these days," you have handed your servant two contradictory orders in the same shift, and a servant torn between two masters simply stands still. Picture a man standing at his kitchen counter each morning, speaking with real feeling, "I am prosperous. Supply flows to me easily," and he means it. In that moment he truly does. But by noon he is sitting across from a co-worker at lunch, sighing over the price of everything, saying money just does not stretch the way it used to, and by evening he is scrolling his banking app with a tight chest, muttering under his breath that he will never get ahead, that man has not spoken one sentence today, he has spoken 3, and they cancel each other out the way a plus and a minus meet in the middle and leave nothing behind. This is why so many affirmations feel powerful in the moment and powerless by nightfall. It was never that the words were too small. It was that they were undone by their own opposite spoken, hours later, without him even noticing the sabotage. The fix begins with noticing, simply noticing, catching yourself mid-sentence when the old fearful habit of speech tries to speak louder than the new declared word. So today, right now, choose one single sentence about your supply, and let it be the only sentence you allow yourself to speak on the subject. Not 2, not a hopeful one, followed by a doubtful one, just one. Guard it the way you would guard a small flame carried across a windy yard, cupping your hands around it, refusing to let the old habit blow it out before it ever reaches the house. So speak this decree with me. I speak one word only, and that word is yes. I speak one word only, and that word is yes. The second law is this. Faith and word must weigh the same on the scale, or nothing moves. Florence Scovel Shinn often said that many people pray amiss because they ask with the mouth for one thing, while the heart is fully convinced of another. And James called this wavering, Not wickedness, simply wavering, like a person standing on a scale trying to lean both ways at once. Imagine a woman named Ruth, who declares each morning, "I now attract wonderful opportunities," and she says it with a bright, hopeful voice. Yet Ruth has spent the last 10 years quietly convinced that opportunities pass her by and land on other people instead. She watched a sister get the scholarship, a co-worker get the promotion, a friend get the lucky introduction, and somewhere along the way her heart filed a private verdict: opportunity simply does not choose me. So now every morning her mouth places a shining coin on one side of the scale, and her long-settled heart quietly places a much heavier stone on the other. And the scale, being perfectly honest, always tips toward the heavier side. This is not punishment, it is law. The universe is not withholding from Ruth out of unkindness. It is faithfully mirroring the truer, deeper belief still sitting underneath the pretty sentence. So the real work is never in finding fancier words. It is never in adding more affirmations to the pile, hoping volume will finally outweigh conviction. The real work is in quietly asking yourself, alone, without performing for anyone, do I actually believe this sentence when no one is listening? And if the honest answer is not yet, that is not failure, that is simply information. It tells you exactly where the inner work must begin. Picture Ruth finally asking herself that question one evening and admitting quietly, "No, I do not fully believe it yet." And notice how that honest admission, strange as it sounds, is actually closer to faith than her cheerful morning recitation ever was. Because now, she is finally standing in the truth instead of decorating over it. Florence Scovel Shinn would say, "Do not force belief. Feed it. Feed it the way you would feed a small fire that needs kindling before it can hold a log. Feed it small proofs, a returned favor, an unexpected kindness, a door that opened just slightly wider than expected. Feed it gentle evidence gathered patiently day by day. Feed it quiet repetition until the scale settles on its own, into agreement, rather than being yanked into balance by sheer will. Because a forced faith is still a wavering faith, wearing a confident mask. And only a settled faith can lift the word into manifestation. Think of it as tending a garden rather than commanding a machine. You do not shout at a seed to grow faster. You simply keep watering it and trust the quiet, unseen work happening beneath the soil. So speak this decree with me. My heart and my word now agree as one. My heart and my word now agree as one. The third law is this: the anchored word outlasts the passing weather of the day. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that circumstances are meant to be servants, not masters. Yet most people let the morning headline, the unpaid bill, the unreturned phone call, decide what they are permitted to believe for the next 24 hours. And each time the outer weather changes, the inner word changes with it, which means the word was never anchored. It was only ever floating on the surface of feeling, tossed exactly the way James described, driven by the wind, tossed by every wave. But consider a ship that has actually dropped its anchor into the deep. The surface may still churn, the wind may still blow, yet the ship itself does not drift, because its true connection is not to the surface at all. It is to something steady far beneath it. This is exactly the picture of the settled word. You may still feel the wind of a delayed payment or a difficult conversation. That is simply weather. It is not law. The law is your consciousness, and consciousness is only shaken when you agree to let it be shaken. Let me tell you a small, ordinary story. Picture a man who has just declared over his morning coffee, "Supply flows to me from every direction." He feels strong saying it. He almost believes it fully. And then the mail arrives an hour later with a bill he was not expecting. And in that single moment, his whole inner weather shifts. His shoulders drop, his breath tightens, and without even noticing, he has quietly taken back every word he spoke over that coffee. He has let a piece of paper decide what his consciousness is allowed to hold for the rest of the day. This is not weakness. This is simply what happens to a word that was spoken, but never anchored. It floats beautifully in calm water and capsizes the moment a single wave arrives. Now picture that same man. Having done the inner work of anchoring, the bill still arrives. The ink is just as real. The amount has not changed, but this time something in him has changed. He looks at it and says quietly to himself, "This is only weather. My supply was never decided by paper." And he goes on with his day, steady, unshaken, still holding the very same sentence he spoke over his coffee. Notice carefully. The circumstance in both versions of this story is identical, only the depth of the anchor is different. This is Florence Scovel Shinn's whole teaching in miniature. The outer facts rarely change first. The consciousness changes first, and then, in its own perfect timing, the outer facts rearrange themselves to match the steadier word. Think also of a tree standing through a storm. The leaves shake violently, the branches bend, sometimes even crack, yet the roots beneath the soil remain undisturbed, and it is the roots, not the leaves, that determine whether the tree survives the season. Your daily moods, your leaves, will always shake a little in the ordinary winds of life. This is simply being human. But your roots, your true settled word, do not need to shake with them. The discipline here is beautifully simple. When the wave rises, you do not fight the wave, and you do not deny that it rose. You simply refuse to let it move your anchor. You say inwardly, "This is passing weather. My supply is not decided by weather." And you return, calmly, without drama, to the one sentence you have already chosen to stand on. This single return, practiced daily, small wave after small wave, is what slowly deepens the anchor, until one day, the storms that used to capsize you barely stir the surface at all. This single return, practiced daily, is what Florence Scovel Shinn meant by staying steady in the word. Not the absence of storms, but the refusal to let storms rewrite your decree. So speak this decree with me. My word is anchored. The storm may pass, but I remain. My word is anchored. The storm may pass, but I remain. The fourth law is this. The word cannot fill a bowl. The self-concept has already declared too small. Florence Scovel Shinn taught again and again that we are always dealing with self-concept before we are ever dealing with circumstance, because circumstance is simply the shadow the self-concept casts. And here is the quiet trouble hiding underneath so many disappointed affirmations. A person can say, "I am wealthy," with real enthusiasm, yet somewhere beneath that sentence there lives an old, tired, almost forgotten belief that says people like me do not get to be wealthy, or money has always been hard for our family, or I am the responsible one who manages lack well but never truly prospers. And that old bowl, cracked and small as it is, was shaped over years, sometimes decades, by a childhood remark, a repeated warning, a single humiliating moment around money that got quietly filed away as truth. Let me tell you about a woman I will call Grace, because Grace is exactly what she was learning to receive. Grace sat at her kitchen table every single morning with her coffee and her index card, and on that card she had written in her own careful handwriting, "I am a magnet for wealth," and she said it slowly. She said it with feeling. She even smiled while she said it. And by every outward measure, she was doing everything Florence Scovel Shinn ever taught about the spoken word. And yet 6 months later, her bank account looked almost exactly the way it had looked before she began. So Grace did what so many of us do. She assumed the affirmation itself was somehow defective. She went looking for a better sentence, a more poetic phrase, a longer list of declarations, when the truth was far simpler and far more tender than that. Grace had grown up in a house where her mother said, almost like a lullaby, "We are not the kind of people things come easy to." And that sentence, repeated across 1,000 ordinary evenings, had quietly built itself into a bowl, small, chipped, familiar, and every single morning when Grace spoke her golden new words, she was pouring bright water into that same old inherited bowl, and the water simply ran out through the crack that sentence had left behind so many years before. She never noticed the leak, because the leak was old. It was familiar. It felt like normal life, rather than like a wound, still quietly bleeding her supply away. This is precisely why Florence Scovel Shinn placed such importance on what she called changing the concept of self, not simply changing the sentence on the surface, but going down to the actual identity, doing the believing underneath the sentence, and asking gently, without shame, who do I secretly think I am when it comes to money, when it comes to worth, when it comes to receiving? Because the bowl is rarely dramatic. It rarely announces itself. It usually sounds like something so ordinary you would never think to question it. It sounds like that is just how our family is. Or I have always been better at giving than receiving. Or people like me work hard and get by. Small, quiet sentences, worn smooth by repetition, sitting beneath every bright new affirmation like a stone beneath a garden. Here we must be tender with ourselves, because that old self-concept is not an enemy to be attacked. It is simply an old servant who was trained wrong a long time ago and never told the training had changed. Imagine a servant hired decades ago by a household that once genuinely struggled. A servant taught to guard every coin, to expect the cupboards to run bare, to brace constantly for the next hard season. And imagine that household later grows prosperous, yet no one ever sits that faithful old servant down and tells him the situation has changed. So he keeps guarding, keeps bracing, keeps hiding coins in the walls out of old habit, not out of malice, simply out of loyalty to instructions no one ever updated. This is exactly what the old self-concept is doing inside you. Every time your bright new word tries to move through it, it is not attacking you. It is simply still following orders from a much earlier chapter of your life. So instead of fighting the servant, you retrain the servant, patiently, the way you would patiently retrain someone who has worked faithfully but under outdated instructions. Grace, once she understood this, stopped repeating her affirmation louder and instead began speaking directly to the old belief itself. She would sit at that same kitchen table and say, out loud, gently but firmly, "We are not that family anymore. We do not have to brace for hard times. We are the kind of people supply flows toward easily now." And then she did something Florence Scovel Shinn would have loved. She pictured her mother's old worn sentence as an actual chipped wooden bowl, and she pictured herself lifting it with both hands, thanking it quietly for keeping her careful all those years, and setting it down on the ground. And in its place, she pictured a wide golden bowl, rising up into her open hands, whole, without a single crack, wide enough to hold far more than she had ever dared imagine before. This single mental picture, practiced with real feeling, does more to establish a lasting affirmation than 1,000 repetitions spoken over a bowl that was never changed, because Florence Scovel Shinn always taught that the subconscious speaks and responds far more readily to pictures and feeling than to words alone. And the picture of setting down the old bowl gives the subconscious a clear, felt permission to stop guarding what no longer needs guarding. It is not enough to simply tell it the danger has passed. You must show it, gently, the way you would show a frightened animal that the door is truly open. So when your affirmation this week does not seem to be landing, do not shout the words louder, do not add more affirmations to the pile. Instead, ask quietly, what old bowl am I still holding? Whose sentence is this really? And set it down, one time, on purpose, with your whole heart, and notice, the way Grace slowly noticed, that the leaking stops not because the words got fancier, but because the vessel finally got wider. So speak this decree with me. I lay down the old bowl and I lift the new one. I lay down the old bowl and I lift the new one. The fifth law is this: one sentence spoken once is a wish. One sentence carried as a state is a law. Florence Scovel Shinn made a careful distinction that most people rush past in their hurry to feel better quickly. She taught that an affirmation spoken once in a hopeful mood is simply a nice thought sent up into the air, but an affirmation allowed to settle into a state, an atmosphere you carry through the coffee cup, the doorway, the phone screen, the ordinary, unremarkable minutes of an ordinary day, becomes something else entirely. It becomes the very climate your consciousness lives inside, and law responds to climate far more reliably than it ever responds to a single burst of enthusiasm, no matter how sincerely that burst was felt in the moment. Think of a woman we will simply call Grace, who wakes each morning and speaks her chosen sentence with real feeling. Standing at her mirror, she says, "I am abundantly supplied." And for those 30 seconds, she means it completely. Then she pours her coffee, and while the cup is still warm in her hand, she glances at her banking app and sighs. Just a small sigh, barely noticed, and mutters something is always eating into this account. Then she walks out her front door, and as she locks it behind her, she thinks, "Here we go again, another long day just to stay afloat." Then at her desk, her phone lights up with a message from a friend announcing wonderful news: a raise, a trip, a new opportunity, and something quiet and unexamined in her tightens for just a moment before she remembers to smile and type congratulations. None of these moments felt like unbelief to Grace. They felt like simply being human, simply having an ordinary Tuesday. But every one of them, the coffee cup, the doorway, the phone screen, was quietly writing a sentence louder and more constant than the one she spoke at the mirror, because the mirror sentence lasted 30 seconds, and the ordinary hours lasted 15 more. Florence Scovel Shinn would say, the trouble was never that Grace's morning words were false. They were true the moment she spoke them. The trouble was that she treated the affirmation like a task to complete, rather than a temperature to maintain. Imagine a house with a furnace that runs for exactly 1 minute each morning and is then switched off for the rest of the day. The house may feel briefly warm right after that 1 minute, but by afternoon, the cold has crept back in through every window and every door, because warmth was never sustained. It was only visited. This is precisely what happens to a word spoken once with feeling and then left unguarded through the long, ordinary stretch of hours that follow. The affirmation was real heat, but the house was never actually kept warm by it, only touched by it briefly before the old draft returned to fill the rooms again. So Florence Scovel Shinn would gently redirect our attention away from the peak moment of the morning ritual and toward the quiet, unnoticed tone underneath everything else. Not the mirror, but the mutter over the bank app. Not the declared sentence, but the tired joke about being broke that gets a small laugh at dinner and is spoken with more conviction than anyone at the table realizes. These are the true builders of the state, brick by brick, hour by hour, far more powerful in their sheer repetition than any single formal affirmation could ever be on its own. 100 small, tired sentences, spoken without thought, will always outweigh one bright sentence, spoken once with effort. This is simply how consciousness accumulates its weight, through repetition, not through intensity alone. And this does not mean you must become tense or watchful or performative through every waking hour. Forcing a strained smile at the coffee cup and a rehearsed line at the doorway, that would only trade one kind of exhaustion for another. What it means instead is far gentler. It means you let the one sentence you have already chosen become the quiet, resting hum beneath everything else you do, the way a familiar tune hums quietly in the back of the mind, without anyone straining to keep singing it. So that when the phone screen lights up with someone else's good news, instead of a tightening you simply feel, without strain, without performance. There is plenty here for her, and plenty here for me too. And when the bill arrives in the doorway mail slot, instead of reciting a script, you simply feel, quietly, supply meets me here also. This ease, repeated softly across the small, ordinary moments of an ordinary day, is what finally lets the golden thread run all the way through the day, rather than living inside one isolated pocket of it each morning and going dark for the other 15 hours. Picture that same golden thread, the way it is shown in the image before us, running through the coffee cup, through the doorway, through the phone screen, one continuous strand of light, joining what would otherwise be scattered, unrelated moments into a single unbroken state. This is what Florence Scovel Shinn meant when she spoke of living in the consciousness of your good, rather than merely speaking of it, living in it, the way you live in a house, not the way you visit a store. You do not affirm supply the way you run an errand and then return to an entirely different atmosphere for the rest of the day. You affirm it the way you set the temperature of the room you actually intend to keep dwelling in. So this week, notice one ordinary hour, just one, the coffee cup, or the doorway, or the phone screen, and practice letting your chosen sentence hum quietly beneath that single hour, without straining or performing it. And when that hour holds steady, choose another, and let the golden thread lengthen one ordinary moment at a time, until the whole day finally carries the same warm and steady climate the mirror sentence always intended for it to have. So speak this decree with me. My ordinary hours now carry my chosen word. My ordinary hours now carry my chosen word. The sixth law is this: the word that is watched too closely never gets permission to work. Florence Scovel Shinn spoke often of what she called releasing the word, letting it go, the way a gardener lets go of a planted seed, because a seed dug up every few hours to check on its progress never has the chance to root. And yet this is precisely what so many well-meaning students of the word do without realizing it. They speak the affirmation beautifully in the morning, and then spend the rest of the day checking, watching the bank account, scanning the inbox, studying every small sign for proof that it worked yet. And each check is, quietly, an announcement of doubt, because you do not anxiously monitor something you truly trust has already been set into motion. You only monitor what you secretly fear might fail. Picture a woman named Ruth, and Ruth has just spoken her sentence for the morning. She has said, quietly but with feeling, "The right position is now open to me." And it is a lovely sentence, well chosen, well spoken. But by 9:15, she is refreshing her email for the third time. By 10, she has checked her phone during a meeting to see if the recruiter has written back. By lunchtime, she has told 2 friends about the affirmation and asked them both, "Do you think it will work? Do you really think it will happen?" And by evening, she is lying awake, running the whole scenario through her mind again, wondering. Now notice, Ruth did not say a single doubtful sentence out loud all day. Her words were faithful, her words were lovely, and yet her behavior was shouting something entirely different. Her behavior was saying, quite plainly, "I do not actually believe this is settled. I am still managing it. I am still holding the string." And Florence Scovel Shinn would say the subconscious mind, being wonderfully literal and wonderfully honest, will always believe the louder message, and behavior is almost always louder than a morning sentence. This anxious watching is a subtler cousin of the double-mindedness James described. It looks like faith on the surface, because the words sound faithful, but underneath, the checking behavior itself is speaking a more constant sentence that says, "I am not sure this is handled." And here is the tender part of this law. Ruth is not a person of weak faith. She is simply a person who has not yet learned to separate the moment of speaking from the process of unfolding. She believes, quite sincerely, that if she stops watching, Somehow the thing will stop moving, as though her attention were the engine rather than her faith. But the engine was never her watching. The engine was always her word, spoken once, spoken with feeling, and released. The watching adds nothing to the engine, it only drains the driver. I think of it this way. When you mail a letter that truly matters, a signed contract, a birthday card carrying real love inside it, you do not stand at the mailbox all afternoon staring at the little metal door, waiting to watch it get collected. You do not follow the mail truck down the street. You do not call the postal service every hour asking for an update. You simply place the letter inside, you close the little door, and you walk back to your life. Because the mailing itself was the act of faith. Everything after that belongs to a system already designed to carry it forward, without your supervision. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that the spoken word works exactly the same way. The speaking is the mailing, and once it is mailed, the anxious trip back to the mailbox every hour does not speed up the delivery. It only tires out the one doing the walking. So what does releasing actually look like in an ordinary day? It does not mean pretending you have no desire. It does not mean forcing yourself to feel nothing. It simply means that after the word is spoken, you deliberately turn your attention toward something ordinary and pleasant. A task with your hands, a walk outside, a meal cooked slowly and with care, a conversation with someone you love, not as a distraction from the outcome, but as trust in motion. Because trust that only stays trust while you are staring at the mailbox is not yet trust. It is simply hope wearing trust's clothing. Real trust can leave the room. Real trust can go make dinner. Real trust can fall asleep at night without checking the phone one more time. And Florence Scovel Shinn would say that this kind of released, unwatched faith is precisely what allows law to move unhindered, because it is no longer being pulled back and re-examined every hour by a nervous hand. There is also a gentler side to this law worth naming. Sometimes the checking is not really about the outcome at all. Sometimes it is a quiet way of trying to control something that feels too important to leave alone. And Florence Scovel Shinn would say, the very act of loosening that grip, on purpose, again and again, is itself a spiritual practice. It is training the self to believe that the word, once spoken, does not need a bodyguard standing over it. It needs only to be left in capable hands. So if you notice yourself checking, do not scold yourself for it. Simply notice, smile a little, and gently say to yourself, I have already mailed this letter, and turn back toward the ordinary, pleasant task in front of you. Each time you do this, the grip loosens a little more, until one day you realize you spoke the word this morning and never once thought to chase it. So this week, practice mailing the letter. Speak your one chosen sentence with full feeling, and then, on purpose, turn your attention towards something ordinary and pleasant, a task, a walk, a meal cooked with care, not to avoid the outcome, but to release the outcome into hands far more capable than anxious checking has ever been. So speak this decree with me. I release my word and I do not chase it. I release my word and I do not chase it. The seventh law is this. The affirmation only becomes a law when it is allowed to look ordinary before it looks miraculous. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that supply, real lasting supply, so often arrives disguised in the plainest possible clothing, and this becomes a quiet trap for the person who has decided, without quite admitting it, exactly what the answer must look like. Someone declares, I am open to receive abundance, but secretly they have already written the script. It must arrive as a large check. It must come from that one specific client. It must look impressive enough to prove the affirmation worked. And when the actual answer arrives, instead as a small unexpected refund, or a friend paying back a forgotten debt, or a simple opportunity to earn a modest but steady amount doing something humble, it gets waved away, dismissed as too small, too ordinary, not what was asked for, and so the very door that opened quietly gets closed again by the person's own judgment. Let me tell you how this looks in an ordinary week. A man we will call Thomas had been affirming for months, "I am a magnet for prosperity. My supply flows to me easily." And in his mind, without ever saying it aloud, he had already decided this prosperity would arrive through a promotion at his company, something with a title attached, something he could announce at dinner with a little pride in his voice. Weeks passed, no promotion came, but a neighbor, hearing that Thomas was handy with small repairs, offered him $40 to fix a leaking faucet on a Saturday afternoon, and Thomas nearly said no, because in his mind, this was beneath the prosperity he had been declaring. This was not the answer. This was a distraction from the answer. And yet Florence Scovel Shinn would have told him gently, "This $40, received with joy, is not a distraction from your prosperity. It is your prosperity, wearing work clothes instead of a suit, because the law does not care what costume supply wears. It only cares whether the hand receiving it is open or closed, whether the heart behind the hand says finally, or says, 'Is that all?'" The following Saturday, another neighbor asked him to fix a fence. Then another asked him to help move furniture, and slowly, quietly, what had looked like a series of small, unrelated errands revealed itself as the very channel his prosperity had chosen. Wider now, steadier now, simply because he stopped despising the small beginnings of it. This is exactly what the old scripture meant when it warned against despising the day of small things, because the day of small things is very often the day the law chose to test whether you could recognize your own good wearing an unfamiliar face. So many affirmations fail not because the law withheld anything, but because the answer arrived right on schedule, knocked softly, and was mistaken for a stranger at the door. Now think of this same law playing out in a kitchen rather than a toolbox. Picture a mother who has been affirming quietly for weeks, "Help is on its way to me. I am supported. I do not carry this alone." And in her mind, she has pictured that help arriving as extra income, enough to hire someone, enough to finally breathe. Instead, what arrives is her own sister calling to say she will take the children on Saturday mornings so her sister can rest. And at first, this mother almost brushes the offer aside, thinking that is not what I meant. I need money, not babysitting. But if she pauses long enough to really look at it, she will see that what she actually asked for was support. And support has arrived exactly on time, wearing her sister's voice instead of a paycheck. The law kept its word perfectly. It was her own narrow picture of the answer that nearly caused her to miss it, standing right there in the doorway. Consider also the woman praying steadily for the funds to repair her car, picturing in her mind a single large sum arriving all at once, and instead finding that her sister unexpectedly insisted on paying back an old loan, that a client paid an invoice 3 days early, that a coupon appeared in the mail for the exact repair shop she needed. None of these alone looked like the answer she had pictured, and so for a full week she nearly missed that together. Quietly, without fanfare, they were the answer, arriving in pieces small enough to walk through the plain wooden door without announcing themselves. Florence Scovel Shinn would say this is precisely how supply prefers to move when it is not being watched too closely or judged too harshly. It comes in increments the anxious eye can overlook, and gathers into a whole only for the eye that has learned to bless every piece as it arrives. The discipline of this law, then, is not a discipline of waiting for something impressive. It is a discipline of noticing, of pausing at each small, unremarkable moment and asking, "Is this perhaps the door?" and answering that question with gratitude before you have even confirmed it, because gratitude offered at the plain door tends to be what widens it into the next room. While suspicion offered at the plain door tends to be what seals it shut again, imagine two people receiving the exact same small, unexpected $50 in the mail. One says, "Is that all?" after everything I have been declaring, and the door narrows. The other says, "Thank you. This is the law moving. More is surely on its way," and the door widens. The money in both cases was identical. The consciousness receiving it was not. And consciousness, not money, is what the law is always actually responding to. Think of it the way you might think of a tiny stream that feeds into a much larger river further downstream. If you stand only at the mouth of the stream, expecting a river's width right away, you will call it too small and walk away disappointed. But if you understand that this same modest little stream is quietly carving the very channel the larger water will one day travel through, you begin to treat it with respect. You keep it clear. You do not dam it up out of impatience. This is exactly how Florence Scovel Shinn asked her students to treat every small answer, not as the whole river, but as the channel being carved for the river still to come. Despise the stream and you may never see it widen. Honor the stream and you are, quietly, preparing the very bed the fuller supply will later flow through. This is also why Florence Scovel Shinn so often reminded her students that the word was never asked to deliver a specific costume. It was asked to deliver supply, and supply is wonderfully creative about the form it takes, sometimes arriving as an idea instead of income, sometimes as a returned favor instead of a windfall, sometimes as simple relief from a bill you feared instead of a fortune you imagined, sometimes as a phone call from an old friend instead of the phone call you had been rehearsing in your mind. The law is never late, and it is never stingy. It is simply, endlessly, more inventive than our own narrow expectations ever gave it credit for being. So this week, watch for the plain wooden doors, the small, unremarkable answers, the $40 faucet, the early invoice, the returned loan, the coupon that seems too convenient to be coincidence, the sister who offers her time instead of her money, and greet each one the way you would greet the grand answer you originally pictured, with warmth, with thanks, with the quiet certainty that this ordinary door is simply the visible edge of something larger already moving toward you. Because the golden door and the plain door were never two different answers. They were always the very same supply, wearing whatever clothing the moment called for, and the hand that learns to welcome both, equally, without preference, is the hand the whole river eventually finds its way toward. So speak this decree with me. I welcome the plain door as warmly as the golden one. I welcome the plain door as warmly as the golden one. The eighth law is this: the word spoken in fear, for yourself alone, rarely holds. But the word spoken from a full and generous heart tends to hold like iron. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that supply is not a fixed pie with only so many slices to fight over. It is an infinite substance, ever flowing, ever renewing, poured from a source that never runs low no matter how many hands reach toward it, and a consciousness that grips its own affirmation out of scarcity, quietly afraid there will not be enough to go around, is unknowingly speaking from the very fear James warned against, because underneath the hopeful words lies a tight, guarded, anxious grip. And law can feel the difference between an open hand and a clenched fist, even when both hands are saying the exact same sentence out loud. Picture for a moment two co-workers sitting at neighboring desks. Both of them have learned about the spoken word. Both of them are quietly affirming a coming promotion. The first woman says her words beautifully each morning. I am moving upward. New opportunity is mine. Yet when she hears that her co-worker across the hall has just been given a wonderful new account, something in her tightens. She smiles on the outside, but inside, a small voice whispers, "There goes my chance." As if good were a single loaf of bread, and every slice given to someone else is a slice taken from her own plate, She does not say this out loud. She may not even fully admit it to herself, but her hand, the inner hand that receives, has quietly closed into a fist even while her mouth keeps affirming openness. The second woman speaks nearly the same sentence. I am moving upward. New opportunity is mine. But when she hears the very same news about her co-worker's new account, she claps her hands together and means it. She says how wonderful. I am so glad for her. And she feels no shrinking at all, because somewhere in her consciousness, she has settled the truth that her co-worker's good and her own good are not drawing from the same limited well. They are two separate cups, being filled from the very same overflowing river, and a river does not run dry because one more cup was filled from it. This is the whole difference between an affirmation that wavers and an affirmation that holds. Not the words themselves, which may be identical, but the state standing behind the words. One state secretly believes in a limited pie and therefore experiences every stranger's success as a threat. The other state rests in the truth of unlimited supply and therefore experiences every stranger's success as proof, gentle living proof, that the very good she is asking for is already moving visibly through the world and is fully capable of reaching her too. Florence Scovel Shinn would say the shopkeeper who resents the shop across the street is, without realizing it, affirming lack even while her lips affirm abundance, because resentment of another's good is simply scarcity wearing a hopeful-looking coat, and law, being wonderfully literal, responds not to the coat, but to what is actually being worn underneath it. Think also of the small, ordinary moment at a restaurant table, when a server brings wonderful news to the family at the next table. Perhaps they are celebrating, perhaps a generous tip has just changed hands, and one person at your own table mutters, "Must be nice. Some people have all the luck," while another simply smiles and thinks good for them. May my own table be blessed the very same way tonight. Both people go home to the very same modest paycheck that week, yet one of them has just fed their own consciousness a small, quiet lesson in scarcity, and the other has just fed their own consciousness a small, quiet lesson in overflow. And these small, unremarkable choices, repeated day after day, become the actual atmosphere the affirmation must try to grow in. An affirmation planted in soil laced with resentment struggles the way any seed struggles in poisoned ground, no matter how sincerely it was planted. But an affirmation planted in soil kept generous and clear grows almost effortlessly because nothing beneath the surface is working against it. This is why Florence Scovel Shinn so often linked the spoken word to generosity, not as a moral rule handed down from outside to make us behave nicely, but as a practical, almost mechanical law of consciousness, because a heart that quietly believes in scarcity will always, sooner or later, sabotage its own affirmation with one small, ungenerous thought slipped in sideways, while a heart that has settled into believing in abundance for everyone finds its own word growing stronger every single time it blesses someone else's good fortune. So here is the practice for this week. And it is a small one, almost too small to seem important. Yet it is exactly the kind of small hinge Florence Scovel Shinn built her whole teaching around. When you notice someone else receiving good, a friend's raise, a stranger's lucky parking spot, a neighbor's new car, a sibling's engagement, a co-worker's bonus, pause for one breath and bless it, out loud if you can, silently if you must. Simply say inwardly how wonderful, I am glad, and let their good remind you, gently and immediately, that the very same ocean that just reached their shore has not moved one single inch further away from your own. This one habit, practiced honestly, is one of the fastest ways Florence Scovel Shinn knew to loosen the secret clenched fist hiding behind an otherwise well-spoken affirmation, because you cannot bless another's supply with a genuinely open hand while simultaneously keeping your own hand closed. The two postures cannot occupy the same body at the same time, So choose the open hand on purpose, again and again, until it becomes simply how you stand in the world. So speak this decree with me. I bless every good I see, for it proves my own good is near. I bless every good I see, for it proves my own good is near. The ninth law is this: the unshaken word, spoken from an unshaken self, is the only word that never returns void, and this final law gathers up every law before it, because we have moved from the single divided house to the balanced scale, to the anchored ship, to the reshaped bowl, to the ordinary hour, to the released letter, to the plain wooden door, to the generous open hand. And now we arrive at the center, where all of it was always quietly pointing, the unwavering flame that James described as the opposite of the double-minded man. Picture a room with the door left open and the wind blowing freely through it. Any candle placed there will flicker constantly, sometimes nearly going out, sometimes flaring, entirely at the mercy of whatever draft happens to move through the room that day. This is the double-minded consciousness, endlessly reactive, endlessly rearranged by outer circumstance. But picture now a room with the door closed, the windows sealed, no draught reaching in at all. A candle placed there burns steady, tall, and undisturbed. Not because the world outside has become calm, the world outside may still be full of wind and weather, but because the room itself, the inner chamber of consciousness, has been quietly, deliberately sealed against being tossed about by every current that passes. Think for a moment of an old lighthouse keeper standing watch on a rocky coast. The sea below him churns all night long. The wind rattles the glass. The rain drives sideways against the tower, and yet the lamp at the very top of that tower does not flicker with the storm. It cannot, because the lamp room was built, on purpose, sealed thick, glassed in tight, so that whatever the ocean does far below has no access at all to the small, steady flame burning at the center. The ships out on the water never see the storm the keeper is standing in. They only see the light, constant, unmoving, exactly where it always is. And that is the whole picture of the settled word. Your neighbors, your family, your own worried thoughts may all be storming around you about the economy, about the delay, about the bill that has not cleared yet. But none of that weather was ever given a key to your lamp room. The moment you understand that your consciousness is a sealed chamber and not an open porch, you stop expecting the wind to politely die down before you can feel steady. You simply seal the room and let the wind do what wind does far outside it. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that this sealing is not achieved by willpower or by gritting your teeth through every difficulty. It is achieved by a settled, practiced knowing that the word, once spoken in faith, is already law, already accomplished on some level, working itself out in its own perfect timing, and there is nothing left to do but stand, steady, undisturbed, exactly the way Isaiah once described, standing still to see the salvation move on your behalf. Consider an ordinary evening at a family dinner table. Someone asks the question that used to unravel you every single time. Still no job yet, still waiting on that money. And in the old divided house, you would have felt your own flame gutter right there at the table. Your voice would tighten. Your story would spill out in a rush of explanation and worry, dressed up as small talk. But a person who has sealed the room simply answers once, calmly, it is on its way, and returns to the meal. No defending, no over-explaining, no matching the anxious energy of the question with an anxious energy of your own. The relatives may keep their storm, their doubts, their raised eyebrows, that is their weather to stand in. But your lamp does not have to flicker just because their sky is grey. This is what it looks like. In an ordinary kitchen, on an ordinary evening, to let the word stand rather than defend itself. Notice too how differently a sealed room behaves compared to a room merely trying very hard to look calm. Trying hard is still a form of bracing against the wind. It is exhausting. It slips the moment you are tired or caught off guard. But a room that has actually been sealed requires no effort to stay quiet. The quiet is simply the nature of the room now. This is the difference between forcing peace and possessing it, between performing an affirmation and actually being the kind of consciousness the affirmation describes. Florence Scovel Shinn would say, the second one is the only kind that finally holds, because it is not fighting the storm, it has simply stopped being the kind of room a storm can enter. This is why every law we have walked through today was really building toward this one single, unshaken flame, closing the divided house so there is only one voice speaking, balancing the scale so heart and word agree, anchoring the ship so weather cannot move you, reshaping the bowl so it can finally hold what is poured in, letting the ordinary hours carry the same tone as the peak moment, releasing the letter so anxious watching cannot undo the mailing, welcoming the plain door so gratitude keeps every door open, blessing another's good so your own hand stays open rather than clenched, and now, finally, sealing the room itself, so that no matter what wind moves outside your window today, tomorrow, or next month, the flame at your center simply does not move. And here is the quiet promise underneath all of it. A sealed room is not a room cut off from life. It is not coldness. It is not indifference to the world's weather. It is simply a room that has decided the flame is worth more protection than the drama is worth attention. You can still love the people at that dinner table. You can still care about the outcome you are waiting for. You can still feel every ordinary human feeling that moves through a day, and the flame still does not have to gutter, because feeling the wind on your face through a sealed window is not the same as letting the wind into the room. This is the consciousness Florence Scovel Shinn lived from, and it is the consciousness available to you the moment you decide the flame is worth protecting, more than the drama outside is worth entertaining. So speak this decree with me. My flame stands still, though the world moves around it. My flame stands still, though the world moves around it. Here is the whole picture. One house speaking with a single voice. One scale where heart and word finally agree. One anchor holding steady beneath every passing wave. One old bowl set down and one new bowl lifted in its place. One ordinary hour after another, quietly carrying the same golden thread. One word released like a mailed letter, instead of chased like a nervous habit. One plain door, welcomed as warmly as the miracle door. One open, generous hand, blessing every good it sees. And at the very center, one unwavering flame, standing steady in a sealed and settled room. This, Florence Scovel Shinn would say, is what it actually means to ask in faith. Nothing wavering, not perfect certainty about how the answer will look, simply a single undivided consciousness that has stopped fighting itself long enough to let the word do what the word was always designed to do. Now, if these 9 laws have stirred something in you today, if you can feel that your own affirmations have simply been waiting for the crack to be sealed, rather than the words to be louder, know that this is exactly the work we go deeper into inside the Overflow Covenant, a gathering built for those who are ready to move beyond isolated affirmations into a fully sealed, fully steady consciousness of supply. Week by week, we return to these very principles. We practice sealing the room. We practice releasing the word. We practice welcoming the plain doors as they arrive. And we do it together, in a community that holds the flame steady for one another, on the days it feels hard to hold it alone. If that calls to you, come find the details waiting for you below this video, and let this season be the one where your word finally stops wavering and starts working exactly the way Florence Scovel Shinn always promised it could. Let us close together the way we began. Say it with me one final time. I am not double-minded. I am not tossed about. My word is my wand. And again, I am not double-minded. I am not tossed about. My word is my wand. Your affirmations were never broken. They were simply waiting for a single, undivided, steady voice to finally speak them. And that voice, quietly, has been yours all along.